Hey, this is Austin Harman Mixes, and welcome to episode number 7 of the Austin Harman Mixes podcast. I'm so thankful that you're here joining us today for this podcast. We are going to be discussing a really interesting topic, which is about how to get into mixing. How do you become an audio engineer? And the reason why we're going to discuss this topic on the podcast is because, in concurrence with the release of this podcast, I'm also going to be releasing the first video in a very long series of videos called The Fundamentals of Audio, where we're going to start literally from what I call ultra beginner in the content plan. And we're just going to talk about what you have to have from a mindset perspective first to get into being an audio engineer, and it's subsequently going to go from there all the way up to things like wave theory, wave propagation, PA design, etc., etc. So it's going to be a whole big long string of videos. I am in the content recording mode right now, heavily behind the scenes right now. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. But before we do, a couple of quick updates. If you missed episode number 6, which was recorded last week, I talked a lot about Austin Harman Designs and the speakers that we're building, and did a recap of Infocom plans as well as CES. So if you missed that, go check out episode number 5. It's available on YouTube and in the podcast world out there. But without further ado, we're going to be talking today about how to get into audio and what does it mean to get your mind right. And next week, I'm super excited about next week's content. Just as a little teaser, we're going to be kind of continuing along this train of introduction to audio on the pod for a minute. So look forward to next week. I have a very special guest who's going to be joining us, assuming our schedules line up. If they're not on next week's podcast, well, you can just assume that Ohio's winter got to us or something to that effect. But anyway, let's talk about today's content, which is how to get into audio and what you need from a mindset perspective. I think that this is important because so often the situation that we find ourselves in as an audio engineer requires us to have to step very carefully through a situation using logic instead of emotion. And the reason for that is that if you get to a certain point from an audio perspective, you're going to recognize that your audio is an art and it's your craft. And if somebody says something negative about your craft, you're naturally going to get upset about it. And that can bring challenge whenever you are trying to do audio over the long haul. You can get to a place where, my hoodie's jacked up here, you can get to a place where as you're trying to do audio, you become depressed or even not really sure if you want to do audio anymore, because sometimes the criticisms can pile up and there's rarely ever any praise. And I think that it's really important whenever you set out to become an audio engineer to get this right. So let's start from the beginning. First and foremost, where did this come about? Well, years ago, I was actually rooming with a guy. I won't say his name without permission, but he was a fellow redheaded guy just like me. We were in college and he was a guitar player. And I had a big crush on this lady at the time. And she wanted to learn how to play guitar, and she kind of broke my heart a little bit. And I was really into her and she wasn't so into me anymore. And it was a whole thing. And I was real upset about it. So I went up to my roommate and I said, "Hey, man, I want to learn how to play guitar." Now, the motivations for why I want to learn how to play guitar, you can read in between the lines, whatever. But I said that to him, and he looked at me and instinctively said, without thought, he said, "Do you want to learn how to play guitar, or do you want to really learn how to play guitar?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, a lot of people want to play guitar. Not a lot of people want to learn how to play guitar." And I thought about it for a moment, and I realized that he was right, because the amount of time and discipline that it takes to be become a phenomenal guitar player was probably far beyond the emotional desire that I had at that given moment to learn how to play guitar. Because to learn how to play guitar effectively requires years and years of practice and discipline and pushing yourself to learn. And you know, I still can't play guitar to this day, which says a lot about where I was at from a mindset standpoint back then. But the point of that is that audio is the same way. Over the time behind the desk, I've had a number of people walk up to me, whether that's in the church environment or beyond, and say something to the effect of, you know, Austin, I want to learn how to mix. And I've always thought back to that moment with my roommate, and I thought, do you really want to learn how to mix, or do you just want to, you know, look cool? There's really no other way to describe it other than that. Like, what is truly your motivation behind wanting to mix? And I decided to open the series Fundamentals of Audio with this concept of getting your mind right, because I think that a lot of people who want to learn how to become an audio engineer or learn how to become a mix engineer don't necessarily have the drive or the push naturally to get them over some of the humps that they will face along the journey. And there are some people, I guess, that audio engineers, as they're first starting out, a lot of engineers as of late have reached out to me and said, you know, Austin, I'm the only guy there is at my church. I'm the only guy there is at this gig. I'm the only one who knows how to do it a little bit, and I don't really know. What do I do in this situation? And it's like, how do you mic a washing machine that's sitting on a roof or something? It's crazy stuff out there that people are doing. And I'm like, well, okay, let's kind of walk through that. But the point of the matter is that there's people who are forced to do it. Then there's people who want to do it because they want to become a mix engineer for whatever reason. And then there's people who kind of slide what I call butt first into it, where they don't even realize they're becoming an audio engineer until such a time as when one day they wake up and they're behind the desk and they don't know how they really got there. They're just there, and it becomes a part of their story. And it's somewhat my story is that way, where I started out in production as a lighting guy, and we talked about this on the podcast episode number 1. So if you missed that, go ahead and check that out. You know, we talked about that. I didn't like the way my friend was doing the sound, and therefore I decided to start doing it myself. But I never had a push or desire to become an audio engineer at that point. I just wanted it to sound better than my friend could do it. And my desire and push to become a good audio engineer didn't come until way, way later, when I was in a situation where I had to become a good engineer because my livelihood depended on being a good engineer. Up until that point, I never really cared about becoming good because I never had to become good. In fact, I never cared about becoming good at anything because I never had to be good at anything, because I never had to depend on my own skill set to make a living. And that was a very transformational time for me, but it also came at great expense and great cost. And that is why getting your mind right is so very important when discussing, okay, let's get into being an audio engineer. Let's start out at the very basic level. How do you get your mind right? How do you orient your mind around, man, I really want to do this? Well, the first thing is that getting your mind right starts with really settling in on your why. Okay, start with why. And I've referenced a few business books on the podcast up until this point. It's a famous phrase, Simon Sinek, start with why. And it has to do with casting the vision of what it is you're trying to do as a leader within your organization, so that everybody can kind of get on the same page about what the vision is and why it's the case. Now, I would also venture to challenge you, if you want to become an audio engineer, a mix engineer, or maybe you're just starting out, is decide what your why is. What is your why? Why is it that you want to become an audio engineer? Why is it that you want to do this? And I believe that this process of just starting with why also extends into many other aspects of your life, far beyond just becoming an audio engineer. If you want to, for example, get married, why? If you want to own a home, why? If you want to buy a car, why? For me, I want to buy a Porsche 911. Why? You don't need that, Austin. I know I don't, but one day, hopefully, I'll get one. But the point of this is that the why is super important, because just like in the video where I talked about addressing audio complaints, understanding the reason why you're approaching something gives you the ability to defend the chaos. Okay, being an audio engineer is hard, and being behind that desk, you'll have at any given time people coming up to you and saying things that may be hurtful. They may be, counter to what you believe is true. Depending on the size of your church, you may be taking heat for things that are not your fault. That could actually happen at all sizes of churches, by the way, or whatever gig you're doing. And having a very solid foundation of this is why I'm doing this in the first place will allow you to kind of work through those challenges. Now, let me tell you a quick story associated with this. Some time ago, and you might find this funny as me being an audio focused channel, but some time ago I had a regular mix gig that I was doing where I was mixing week over week, and it was a compensated gig, and the expectations were very high. Really good PA, really good band, but the room was really, really challenging to mix in, and that room really worked against me as a mix engineer. So I had to basically reinvent myself 7 times over as far as my mix approach, strategy, what it is I was trying to get out of my mix. And really, I wasn't getting great results. And despite the fact that I had all of these reps and all of this experience, and I was a far better engineer than most of the people around, and sorry if that sounds arrogant, I don't mean it to be, but honestly, like, if you play baseball and you can throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and the next guy up can throw an 89-mile-an-hour fastball, the guy that can throw 100, he knows he's good. And at that point, I was throwing the hundreds, but this was all of a sudden like playing a baseball game with a softball. The rules seemed to have shifted, even though it was somewhat familiar. And I was taking a lot of heat for the mix. I was taking a lot of heat for it being too loud, which is part of the reason why we have the Turn It Down shirt, austinharmanmixes.com/merch. Go order that shirt, Turn It Down. Great shirt. But I was taking a lot of heat, and it was getting to the point where if I didn't get it figured out, I was going to get fired from the gig. And quite honestly, at the time, I didn't want to be fired from the gig. You never want to be fired from the gig, but I really didn't want to be fired from this gig because there was a lot of things dependent in my personal life on me being successful at this gig. And it got to the point where I was frustrated with myself because of my inability to fix it. The staffers at the gig I was working were frustrated with me to the point where they were like, fix it or you're out. And I had to kind of reckon with, I don't even want to mix anymore. I don't want to deal with this problem. I don't want to deal with these people despite their best intentions. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that if you get to that place behind the desk or along your journey, this is where starting with that why and remembering why you did this all in the first place comes full circle. And for me, I had a very simple and very strong why, which is nobody goes home humming the lights. Okay? Whenever you're the audio engineer, you have a ton of control. You have a ton of influence over the way that things sound. And they refer to it as being the 12th man on the field in football. You're really kind of the 6th band member. And if you don't have a great audio engineer behind that desk, it doesn't matter how good your guitar player, your drummer is, the vocalist, doesn't matter. It's going to sound terrible. And a great audio engineer can make a good band sound great, and a bad audio engineer can make a great band sound bad. And the simple reality is that I had to come all the way back to the fundamental why was I doing audio in the first place? And I would love to tell you that it was just a flip of the switch and one day the light bulb came on and I got it fixed and everybody was hunky-dory and happy. But that's not what happened. And over time with that gig, I eventually kind of phased out because the relationship had deteriorated to the point where it was no longer tenable for me to mix week over week there. And I just was having so much trouble. And it would take me a while to kind of repair and recover that relationship. And I'm happy to say that it's in a much better position now. And I still mix at that gig on occasion. But, ultimately, starting with your why and remembering the why is very important to this journey of getting your mind right. You've got to understand, why am I trying to do this? Because ultimately, the hills that you're going to have to kind of ride over are going to be challenging, to say the least. And for me, I can tell you my audio engineering journey has not always been fun, but it's certainly been loud. All right, moving on to the next thing. So you got your why right. Next, understand that audio is a skill that can be taught. Audio is also a skill that has to be learned with experience. Okay. So ultimately, whenever you start with anything, if you have somebody who's a master at something, they're going to teach you their system or their approach. Okay. I once heard it said that good leaders have a plan, great leaders have a system. And I love football. Got my Oklahoma State Cup right over here. Go Cowboys. But when talking with Mike Gundy, the head football coach in Oklahoma State at the time of this recording, Mike Gundy talks a lot about discipline, attitude, and toughness. It's cultural phrases that kind of define, or cultural mannerisms, or however you want to phrase it, that define how that organization approaches things like negative yardage with penalties, toughness, playing 4 quarters of football, attitude, paying very close attention to how things are done, and having the discipline to do things right. And that is kind of a picture of Mike Gundy's system. And Mike Gundy is worthy to talk about because he's been a head coach at a Division I football program for, I think this will be his 20th year. 2024 will be his 20th year as a head coach. And that's just an incredible run for somebody at that level. And there's a reason why he has been successful and that football program has been successful over the years. And that comes down to the philosophy, the fundamentals, but most importantly, the system that Gundy instilled on that program. And even for me, as we're working through recording the Fundamentals of Audio series for you, for all of you out there, I'm teaching you my system, but ultimately my system can only take you so far. Okay. I do audio trainings quite often for churches. By the way, if you're interested in audio training, go to austinharmanmixes.com, click on book, and I'd love to come out and do a training at your church. So when I do audio trainings, I come out and I teach my system, which is, this is how I approach audio. These are the rules to play by. This is what happens if you do X or if you do Y. But ultimately, there are limitations with my own system. There's limitations with anybody's system, because no matter how much you teach somebody, the old adage, you can't learn how to swim by reading a book. Okay, you got to do it. You've got to do it. You got to do it a lot, and you've got to be practicing often. One of my great friends here in the Columbus area, and you'll know who this is if you're listening out there. Love you, man. Hope you're having fun on tour. When I first met him, okay, his responsibility was to determine whether or not I was good at audio, good enough to mix on a Sunday at this new gig. Okay, I had just moved to Ohio, and I showed up at this new gig, and naturally they didn't want me just coming in off the street and taking over the reins. They wanted somebody who was really good and knew what they were doing. Okay, so he sits down next to me, and he hadn't really encountered somebody quite like me in a long time, or ever. I'm not really sure. I'm a very unique person if you haven't picked that up. But he looks at me and he goes, "You're not really an audio engineer unless you're mixing at least 4 to 5 times a week." And I kind of looked at him funny, and I was like, kind of bristled a little bit. I was like, I promise you, I'm an audio engineer and know what I'm doing. Uh, and I don't mix 4 to 5 times a week. And I started to tell him about my experience, and he kind of cut me off a little bit because he didn't care. I mean, this guy was just on a completely different level, and he wasn't interested in hearing any of that. And honestly, he didn't need to hear any of what I had to say that day because it was all crap. But that day kind of instilled something in me, and I haven't forgotten that conversation. But the takeaway there was that getting the reps and doing audio a lot, as much as you can, is so very important to your success when we're talking about becoming an audio engineer. Many of you out there that I've met, even just within the past year, shout out to Matt. If you're listening to the podcast, leave me a comment, buddy. I know you're trying to learn audio, and it's a lot. It really is. And as you're approaching that journey, you have to reconcile with the fact that if you're not doing audio often, every week, multiple times a week, then you're going to have challenge with picking up the skills that are necessary to be successful. And the reality is simple, is that being a great audio engineer requires a strong why, but it also requires years of discipline and practice. Just like learning how to play guitar, to learn how to be a mix engineer, you've got to know a lot of technicals. You've got to know a lot of musicality. You've got to know a lot of different things, and it takes a long time to learn. And fortunately for all of you who are following the channel or listening to Austin and Harman Mixes, I'm going to be condensing something like 20 years worth of audio learnings into a series where I basically tell all, where I try to teach you how to be an audio engineer with everything that I've learned and my system and my approach and how I do things. And I've taken things from some of the best guys in the business and try to implement those into my craft. And I'm going to be sharing those with you. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel or send me an email and get set up with our mailing list. Keep up with us. I would love to take you on this journey with us. But anyway, finally, getting your mind right here is find somebody who can train you, okay? Even Tiger Woods has a coach. And I once heard somebody kicking around and talking about, why does Tiger Woods have a coach? Like, who the heck's better than Tiger Woods at golf? And I'm not talking about his morality, guys. I'm not getting any of that, whatever. Okay, Tiger is one of the best guys in the biz at golf. And the simple reality is that he still needs a coach. And even though I've been doing audio a really, really long time, I still need a coach. Finding somebody who can help to train you doesn't just help you to learn skills, but most importantly, it pushes you beyond your comfort zone. Your capacity to learn on your own is directly limited to how aggressive you are with risk-taking. And ultimately, most people don't have the flexibility, they don't have the grace, or they don't have the opportunity to be able to fail at the rate at which they would need to learn quickly. That's gold, okay? This also applies in other areas of your life. If you think about this, if you went and borrowed $100,000 to start a business and you failed right out the gate because you didn't know what you were doing, you may not ever get $100,000 again to be able to start a business. You may be lucky if you pay that off in your whole life for most of us. But if instead you do what's called bootstrapping, where you don't borrow any money for the business and you take $1 and you make $2, and then you take two and make $4, and eventually you have $5,000 in the bank, and you learn how to make that $5,000 because you went from 5 back down to 1, and you went from 10 back to 5, and you went from 100 back to 20, and you failed at a rate that was proportional to your ability to take risk. And those failures educated you and gave you super important lessons along the way. Years ago, I'll just give you a quick example of this. When I started Red Hair Computer Repair, which I was way more redheaded. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can kind of see my red hair still a little bit. But when I was doing Red Hair Computer Repair years ago, I knew that company was not going to make me the money that I wanted to make. I wanted to be the guy who drove a Porsche 911 to work on Fridays only and had the nice house and all of this stuff. And look, I'm not going to get into all of that here as far as to why, but that was something that I felt strongly about, and I was willing to push to try and achieve those dreams. And when I started Red Hair Computer Repair, people were saying to me, and these are like trusted people around me, they said, Austin, why are you wasting your time? If you know it's not going to make the money, go out and do something else. And I said, you don't understand what this is. Red Hair Computer Repair isn't my retirement. Red Hair Computer Repair is a risk-free learning journey. I can learn how to be a business owner when I don't have my house on the line. I can learn how to be an entrepreneur where if I screw up somebody's phone and the insurance covers it, which in those days we didn't even have insurance, which tells you how inexperienced we were as business people. And I did screw up somebody's phone, by the way, and had to pay $800 out of pocket to replace their phone. That was a big yikes. But I failed a lot along that journey. I screwed it up with customers. I screwed it up with people who were working for me. I've screwed it up with the building people that knew us. I screwed it up with the mentors that were trying to help me get started. I screwed up in every possible way. Screwed up with my business partners, all of that stuff. But ultimately, by the time Red Hair Computer Repair had shut down 4 years later, I had learned a tremendous amount and things that even though I had a 4-year education in business, thanks to Oklahoma State, I didn't learn any of that stuff in college. And the simple reality is that you could never teach somebody that in college. And what I learned there, I took directly straight into the Penn, which I started some number of years later. And all of the learnings that I built on Red Hair Computer Repair took me right out of the gate 10,000 leagues further with the Penn. And then ultimately the Penn caused me to have to learn and to fail. And we had to reinvent, and we had to reinvent, and we had to reinvent. The Penn Group originally started as a cybersecurity consulting company, and now we do audio video lighting installs. And those two things couldn't be further away from each other. But the point is that my ability to learn and to fail as fast as I could and to take big, broad stroke risk, I took them. And I took big risk. And some of the reason why you're listening to this pod today is because I gambled in some cases and in some ways, and I don't mean gamble at the casino, I mean gambled along the journey to the point where if those things went south, it would have taken me years or decades to recover. And if I was able to recover from some of them, and I'm very fortuitous that God was with me through that journey and pushed me to take those risks, but ultimately I was able to learn because I was willing to take those risks. And the same thing is true behind the audio console. All this comes back full circle to mixing audio, which is that you have to be able to take risk. You have to be in a place where you have the opportunity, where you have the grace, where you have the flexibility to be able to take risks. How are you ever going to know the right way to set up overheads if you don't set them up wrong? Okay, I can do a video on how to do overheads and explain to you as much as I can. But if you follow my system and you've got crappy cymbals and your drum set hasn't been tuned since 1980, and I tell you how to put the overheads up and it still sounds terrible, you're still going to get a bad result. And you say, okay, well, Austin Harman's dumb. Well, hopefully not, but the reality is true, is that you've got to be able to learn the why, and you've got to have those reps, and you've got to be able to do it yourself. And ultimately, you can only get so far from learning from somebody else. You have to be able to do it on your own. I heard this quote the other day that I really liked, and I'll share it with you, which is that If you want to learn quickly, learn from others. If you want to learn deeply, learn yourself. Do it yourself. And that, my friends, is episode number 6 of the Austin Harman Mixes podcast. I hope you enjoyed this. If you learned something or you have an opinion about something that I said on this podcast, please leave a comment. I love to answer your comments. And I do this little thing at the end of some of my podcasts just to see who listened to the end. If you made it this far, leave me your favorite emoji in the comments, and I will respond with my favorite emoji. Let's start an emoji party in the comments. For those of you who are watching these videos, you're all the way at the end, you're listening to them in the podcast world. This is awesome. I'm super glad we're doing this. This is episode number 6, and this is going to keep going and going. If there's a product that you'd like to hear me talk about, or if there's a topic that you'd like to hear me talk about on this podcast and this long form content, do leave me a comment or send me an email, sales@thepenn.group, so that we can get going with that. But without further ado, I hope you guys have a great week. Weekly episodes on Wednesdays. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.